The continued story of Taran, the assistant pig keeper. I'm glad you've stayed to listen. Now sit round, as Papa Bear reads a story. Chapter 12. The Wager. "What are you so impatient to be gone, Lord Swineherd?" said Dorath, an edge of mockery in his tone. The dagger twirled in his hands, and he clicked his tongue against his teeth. "Without a farewell, without a word of thanks." He shook his head. "This is grave discourtesy to me and my men. Their feelings are tender. I fear you've deeply wounded them." The men of Dorath's company had begun to stir. In a moment of panic, Taran glanced at Fluter and Gurgi. Gloff had climbed to his feet and held his sword lightly, almost carelessly. Taran knew that the man could bring up the blade in a flash before his own weapon left its sheath. Taran's eyes darted to the horse lines. Another of Dorath's band had drifted close by the steeds, where he stood, idly paring his nails with the point of a hunting knife. Taran gestured for the companions to make no move. Dorath straightened. His eyes were cold. "Truly, do you mean to part with us? Even warned of the dangers in the hills?" He shrugged. "Never say Dorath forces hospitality on unwilling guests. Go, if that's in your head. Seek your treasure, and a speedy journey to you." "We meant you no discourtesy," Taran answered. "Bear us no ill will, for we bear you none. Farewell to you and your company." Much relieved, he beckoned Gurgi and the band and turned away. Dorath's hand gripped his shoulder. "How then?" Dorath cried. "Will you go away without settling the small matter between us?" Taran halted, surprised, as Dorath went on. "Why, there is payment to be reckoned, Lord Swineherd. Will you cheat me of my fee? We are poor men. Lord, too poor to give where we do not receive." The warriors laughed harshly. Dorath's heavy face had twisted into a leering humility, which Taran found all the more fearsome by its falsity, and the man cried out in an accusing, begging tone. "You have eaten our meat, drunk our wine. All night you slept safely under our protection. Is this worth nothing to you?" Taran stared at him in astonishment and sudden alarm. Dorath's men had come to gather near their leader. Gurgi edged closer to Taran. "Protection," Fluter muttered under his breath. "Who'll protect us from Dorath? Protection, great Beelin, I'd call it robbery." "And there is more, Lord Swineherd," Dorath quickly continued. "The matter of payment for guiding you to the Lake of Lunette. It is no light journey for me and my company. The paths are long and harsh." Taran faced the man squarely. "You have given us food, drink, and shelter," he said, his thoughts racing to seek escape from Dorath's trap. "We will pay their worth. As for your protection on our journey, we neither ask it nor want it." "My men are willing and waiting, ready to guide you," replied Dorath. "It is you who breaks the bargain." "I struck no bargain with you, Dorath," Taran answered. Dorath's eyes narrowed. "Did you not? But you will keep it nonetheless." The two watched each other in silence for a moment. The warriors stirred restlessly. From Dorath's expression, Taran could not judge whether the man indeed meant to risk battle. If he did, Taran realized coldly, the companions had little chance to escape unharmed. At last he said, "What do you want from us?" Dorath grinned. "Now you speak wisely. Small scores are quickly settled. We are humble men, lord. We ask little, far less than what our fee should be. But for the sake of the friendship between us, Dorath will be generous. What shall you give me?" His eyes went to Taran's belt. "You carry a fair blade," he said. "It will be mine." Taran's hand clenched on the pommel. "That you shall not have," he answered quickly. "I offer you bridles and harness from our gear, and even these we can ill afford. Dalbin, my master, gave me this blade, the first that was truly mine, and the first of my manhood. The one I love girded it on me, with her own hands. No, Dorath, I will not bargain with my sword." Dorath threw back his head and laughed. "You make much ado for a piece of iron. Your sweetling girded it to your side. Your first blade, this adds no worth. It is a fair weapon, no more. I've cast away better than that. but the look of this one suits me well enough. Give it into my hand and we are quit. Dorath's face filled with cruel pleasure as he reached out. Suddenly, anger goaded Taran. Caution forgotten, he snatched the blade from its sheath and drew back a pace. Have a care, Dorath, Taran cried. Will you take my sword? It will be a costly bargain. You may not live to claim it. Nor you to keep it, Dorath answered, undisturbed. We know each other's thoughts, swineherd. Am I fool enough to risk lives for a trinket? Are you fool enough to stop me? We can learn this easily, Dorath added. To your grief or to mine. Will you try me? My company against yours? When Taran did not answer, Dorath continued. My trade is to spill another's blood, not waste my own. And here the matter is easily settled. Pit one of your number against one of mine. A friendly wager, swineherd. Do you dare? The stakes, your sword. Gloff had been listening all the while. His villainous face lit up, and he stuck his hands together. Well spoken, Dorath. We'll see sport after all. The choice is yours, Lawrence. The choice is yours, swineherd, Dorath said to Taran. Who is your champion? Will that hairy brute you call comrade stand against Gloff? They're both ill-favored enough to be well-matched. Or the Harper? The matter is between you and me, Dorath, Taran replied, and none other. All the better, Dorath answered. Do you take the wager, then? We two, unarmed, win or lose, and the score paid. You have Dorath's word. Is your word as true as your claim? Taran flung back. I trust no bargain with you. Dorath shrugged. My men will withdraw beyond the trees, where they'll be of no help to me, if that's what you fear, and so will yours. What say you now, yes or no? No, no, shouted Gurgi. Kindly, master, beware! Taran looked long at the sword. The blade was plain, the hilt and pommel unadorned, yet even Dorath had seen the craftsmanship in its making. The day Dalbin had put it into his hands shone bright in Taran's memory, as the untarnished metal itself, and Elenwy, her tart words had not hidden her blush of pride. Still, treasure it though he did, he forced himself to see the blade coldly, as indeed no more than a strip of metal. Doubt rose in his heart. Win or lose, he felt unsure whether Dorath would let the companions free without a pitched battle. He nodded curtly. So be it. Dorath signaled to his band, and Taran watched cautiously until all had made their way a good distance into the woods. At Taran's orders, Fluter and Gurgi untethered Lan and the two steeds, and reluctantly withdrew in the opposite direction. Taran flung down his cloak and dropped Elenwy's horn beside it. Dorath waited, a crafty glint in his eyes, as Taran slowly ungirded the scabbard and thrust the sword into the ground. Taran stepped back. In that instant, Dorath sprang upon him without warning. The force of the burly warrior's charge drove the breath from Taran's lungs, and nearly felled him. Dorath grappled with him, and Taran realized the man strove to seize him by the belt and hurl him to the earth. Taran flung up his arms and slipped downward out of Dorath's clutches. Cursing, Dorath struck at him with a hard fist, and though Taran escaped the full weight of the blow, it glanced painfully from the side of his head. Ears ringing, Taran sought to disengage himself and regain sure footing, but Dorath pressed his attack without respite. He dared not, Taran understood, let the heavier opponent come to grips with him, for Dorath's powerful arms could snap him in two. As the warrior plunged once more against him, Taran snatched the man's forearm, and with all his strength swung Dorath head over heels to send him crashing to the ground. Dorath was on his feet in a flash. Taran crouched to meet the warrior's new attack. For all his weight, Dorath moved quickly as a cat. He dropped to one side, spun quickly, and suddenly Taran saw the man's thick fingers gouging at his eyes. As Taran struggled to escape the blinding thrust, Dorath seized him by the hair and wrenched his head backward. The warrior's fist was raised to strike. Taran, gasping at the painful shock, flailed at the man's grinning face. Dorath's hold loosened. Taran tore himself away. For an instant, Dorath seemed bewildered by the rain of blows, and Taran pressed his slight advantage, darting from one side to the other, giving Dorath no chance to gain the upper hand again. Dorath suddenly dropped to one knee and caught at Taran with an outflung arm. Striving to tear himself away, Taran felt a sharp stinging blow to his side. He fell backward, clutching at the hurt. Dorath rose up. He gripped a short-bladed knife drawn from his boot. "Disarm!" Taran cried. "We fight weaponless. You betray me, Dorath." The warrior looked down at him. "Have you learned nothing about which of us is the fool, Lord Swineherd?" Elenwy's horn lay within Taran's grasp, and his fingers reached for it. How long, he thought hurriedly, how long before the fair folk might answer his call? Could he hope to keep Dorath at bay? Or, at the last, could he do no more than turn and flee? He yearned desperately to sound the notes, but with an angry shout he cast aside the battle horn, snatched up his cloak for a shield, and plunged straight against Dorath. The warrior's knife tangled in the folds of the garment. Gaining strength from his anger, Taran ripped the blade from the hand of Dorath, who staggered under the fury of the onslaught and fell to the ground. Taran followed him, seized Dorath by the shoulders, and braced his knee against the warrior's chest. "Cutthroat!" Taran shouted through clenched teeth. "You'd have taken my life for the sake of a bit of iron." Dorath's fingers scrabbled in the earth. His arm shot up. A handful of dirt and stones pelted against Taran's face. "Find me now, swineherd!" cried Dorath with a mighty heave. Taran clapped hands to his smarting eyes, tears streaming down his face, and he groped for the warrior, who sprang away in an instant. Taran stumbled forward on hands and knees. Dorath's heavy boot drove into his ribs. Taran cried out, then fell doubled up and panting. He strove to rise, but even the strength of his anger could not bring him to his feet. He sank down, his face pressed against the ground. Dorath strode to the sword and plucked it from the turf. He turned to Taran. "I spare your life, swineherd," he cried scornfully. "It means naught to me, and I have no wish for it. Should we meet again, it may not go as well for you." Taran raised his head. In Dorath's eyes he saw only cold hatred that seemed to reach out to blight or shatter all it touched. "You have won nothing," Taran whispered. "What have you gained that is worth more to you than to me?" "The getting pleased me, swineherd. The getting pleased me, swineherd. The taking pleases me all the more." Dorath tossed the sword into the air, caught it again, then threw back his head and burst into raw laughter. He turned on his heel and strode into the forest. Even after his strength had come back and the pain in his side had dwindled to a dull ache, Taran sat a long while on the ground before gathering up his belongings. The torn cloak, the battle horn, the empty scabbard, and setting off to join Fluter and Gurgi. Dorath had gone. There was no sign of him, but the laughter still rang in Taran's ears. Chapter 13. The Lost Lamb. Under fair skies and gentle weather, the companions traveled deeper into the hill cantrevs. Gurgi had bandaged Taran's wound, and the smart of it eased more quickly than the sting of losing his sword. As for the bard, the encounter with Dorath had driven away his concern for the length of his ears. He hardly mentioned the word rabbit, and had begun to share Taran's belief in a good ending to a hard journey. Gurgi still grumbled bitterly about the ruffians, and often turned to shake an angry fist in the air. Fortunately, the companions had seen no more of the band, though Gurgi's furious grimaces might well have been enough to keep any marauders at a safe distance. "Shameful robbings," muttered Gurgi. "O kindly master, why did you not sound helpful horn, and be spared beatings and cheatings?" "The blade meant a great deal to me," Taran answered, "but I'll find another that will serve me. As for Elenwy's horn, once used, its power is gone, beyond regaining." "Oh, true," Gurgi cried, blinking in amazement, as if such a thought had never entered his shaggy head. "Oh, wisdom of kindly master, will humble Gurgi's wits never grow sharper?" "We've all wits enough to see Taran chose rightly," put in Fluter. "In his place, I'd have done the same. Ah, no, what I meant," he quickly added, glancing at the harp, "I'd have blown that horn till I was blue in the face. Ho there, steady, old girl," he cried as Lion suddenly plunged ahead. "I say, what are you after now?" At the same time, Taran heard a forlorn bleating coming from a patch of brambles. Lion was already there, crouching playfully, her tail waving in the air, and one of her paws outstretched to tug at the briars. A white lamb was caught in the thicket, and, seeing the enormous cat, bleated all the louder, and struggled pitifully. While Fluter, strumming his harp, drew Lion away, Taran quickly dismounted. With Gurgi's help, he bent aside the brambles and picked up the terrified animal. "The poor thing is strayed, but from where?" Taran said. "I saw no farm nearby." "Well, I suppose it knows its home better than we do," answered Fluter, while Gurgi eyed the lost animal and delightedly patted the creature's fleecy head. "All we can do is let it go and find its own path." "The lamb is mine," called a stern voice. Surprised, Taran turned to see a tall, broad-shouldered man making his way with great difficulty down the rocky slope. Gray streaked his hair and beard, scars creased his wide brow, and his dark eyes watched the companions intently as he toiled over the jutting stones. Unarmed, save for a long hunting knife in his leather belt, he wore the rude garb of a herdsman. His cloak was rolled and slung over his back. His jacket was tattered at the edges, begrimed and threadbare. What Taran had first taken to be a staff or a shepherd's crook, he now saw to be a roughly fashioned crutch. The man's right leg was badly lamed. "The lamb is mine," the herdsman said again. "Why, then it is yours to claim," Taran answered, handing the animal to him. The lamb ceased its frightened bleating and nestled comfortably against the shoulder of the herdsman, whose frown of distrust turned to surprise, as if he had fully expected to be obliged to fight for possession of the stray. "My thanks to you," he said after a moment, then added, "I am Craddock, son of Custennin." "Well met," Taran said, "and now farewell. Your lamb is safe, and we have far to go." Craddock, taking a firm grip on his crutch, turned to climb the slope, and had gone but little distance when Taran saw the man stumble and lose his footing. Under his burden, Craddock faltered and dropped to one knee. Taran strode quickly to him and held out his hands. "If the way to your sheepfold is as stubborn as the ones we've traveled," Taran said, "let us help you on your path." "No need," the herdsman gruffly cried. "Do you think me so crippled I must borrow strength from others?" When he saw that Taran still offered his hands, Craddock's expression softened. "Forgive me," said the herdsman. "You spoke in good heart. It was I who took your words ill. I am unused to company or courtesy in these hills. You've done me one service," he went on as Taran helped him to his feet. "Now do me another. Share my hospitality," he grinned, "though it will be small payment for saving my lamb." As Fluter led the mounts, and Gurgi happily bore the lamb in his arms, Taran walked close by the herdsman who, after his first reluctance, was willing now to lean on Taran's shoulder as the path steepened and twisted upward, before dropping into a deep vale among the hills. The farmstead Taran saw to be a tumble-down cottage, whose walls of stone, delved from the surrounding fields, had partly fallen away. Half a dozen ill-shorn sheep grazed over the sparse pasture. A rusted plough, a broken-handled mattock, and a scant number of other implements lay in an open-fronted shed. In the midst of the high summits, hemmed in closely by thorny brush and scrub, the farm stood lorn and desolate, yet clung doggedly to its patch of bare ground, like a surviving warrior flinging his last, lone defiance against a pressing ring of enemies. Craddock, with a gesture almost of shyness and embarrassment, beckoned the companions to enter. Within, the cottage showed scarcely more cheer than the harsh land around it. There were signs Craddock had sought to repair this fireplace, and broken hearthstone, to mend his roof, and chink up the crannies in the wall. But Taran saw that the herdsman's labor had gone unfinished. In a corner, a spinning wheel beckoned a woman's tasks. But if this were so, her hand had ceased to guide it long since. "Well, friend herdsman," Fluter remarked heartily, setting himself on a wooden bench by a narrow trestle table. "You're a bold man to dwell in these forsaken parts. Snug it is," he quickly added. "Very snug, but, well, rather out of the way." "It is mine," Craddock answered, and his eyes flashed with pride. Fluter's words seemed to stir him, and he bent forward, one hand gripping his crutch and the other clenched upon the table. "I have stood against those who would have taken it from me, and if I must, I shall do so again." Why, indeed, I have no doubt of that, replied Fluter. No offense, friend, but I might say I'm a little surprised anyone would fancy taking it from you in the first place. Craddock did not answer for a time. Then he said, The land was fairer than you see it now. Here we lived among ourselves, untroubled and at peace, until certain lords strove to claim our holdings for themselves. But those of us who prized our freedom banded together against them. Hotly fought was the battle, and much was destroyed. Yet we did turn them back. Craddock's face was grim. At high cost to us. Our dead were many, and my closest friends among them. And I, he glanced at his crutch, I gained this. What of the others? Taran asked. In time, one by one, they quit their homes, Craddock replied. The land was no longer worth the keeping or the taking. They made their way to other cantrevs. In despair, they took service as warriors, or swallowed their pride and hopes, and labored for any who would give them bed and board. Yet you stayed, Taran said, in a ruined land. Why so? Craddock lifted his head. To be free, he answered curtly. To be my own man. Freedom was what I sought. I had found it here, and I had won it. You are luckier than I, friend herdsman, Taran answered. I have not yet found what I seek. When Craddock glanced inquiringly at him, Taran told him of his quest. The herdsman listened intently, saying no word. But as Taran spoke, a strange expression came upon Craddock's face, as though the herdsman strove against disbelief and sought to reach out beyond his own wonder. When Taran finished, Craddock seemed about to speak, but he hesitated, then set the crutch under his arm and rose abruptly, murmuring that he must see to his sheep. As he hobbled out, Gurgi trotted after him to gaze with pleasure at the gentle animals. The day had grown shadowed. Taran and Fluter sat quietly at the table. I pity the herdsman as much as I admire him, Taran said. He fought to win one battle only to lose another. His own land is his worst foe now, and little can he do against it. I'm afraid you're right, agreed the bard. If the weeds and brambles press him any closer, he wryly added, he must soon graze his sheep on the turf of his rooftop. I would help him if I could, Taran replied. Alas, he needs more than I can give. When the herdsman came back, Taran made ready to take his leave. Craddock, however, urged the companions to stay. Taran hesitated, though anxious to be gone. He well knew that Fluter disliked traveling at night. As for the herdsman, his eyes more than his words bespoke his eagerness. And at last, Taran agreed. Craddock's provisions being scant, the companions shared out the food from Gurgi's wallet. The herdsman ate silently. When he had done, he cast a few dry, thorny branches on the small fire, watched them flare and crackle, then turned his gaze to Taran. A lamb of my flock strayed and was found again, Craddock said, but another once was lost and never found. The herdsman spoke slowly and with great effort, as though the words came from his lips at some painful cost. Long past, when all had left the valley, my wife urged that we too should do the same. She was to bear our child. In this place she saw naught but hardship and desolation, and it was for the sake of our unborn that she pleaded. Craddock bowed his head, but this I would not do. As often as she besought me, as often I refused. In time the child was born, our son. The infant lived, his mother died. My heart broke, for it was as if I myself had slain her. Her last wish, Craddock said, his voice heavy with grief, was that I take the child from here. His weathered features tightened. Even that wish I did not heed. No, he added, to my mind I had paid in blood, and more than blood for my freedom. I would not give it up. The herdsman was silent for a while. Then he said, Alone, I sought to raise the child, but it was beyond my skill. A sturdy boy he was, yet in less than a year I saw him sicken. Only then did I understand his mother had spoken wisely, and I, like a proud fool, had not listened. At last I was willing to quit this valley. Too late was my choice, Craddock said. I knew the babe could not live out the journey, nor could he live out another winter here. He was the lamb of my heart, already given to death. But on a certain day, Craddock went on, a wayfarer came by chance to my door. A man of deep knowledge he was, and of many secret healing arts. In his hands alone could the child live. This he told me, and I knew he spoke the truth. He pitied the infant, and offered to raise him for me. Grateful was I for his kindness, as I put the child in his arms. He went his way then, and my son with him. No more did I see or hear of either as the years passed, and often did I fear both had surely perished in the hills. Yet I still hoped, for the stranger vowed by every oath my son would one day return to me. The herdsman looked closely at Taran. The name of the wayfarer was Dulvin. In the fireplace, a thorny branch split and crackled. Craddock said no more, but his eyes never left Taran's face. Fluter and Gurgi stared wordlessly. Slowly Taran rose to his feet. He felt himself trembling, for an instant, fearing his legs would give way under him, and he put a hand to the edge of the trestle table. He could neither think nor speak. He saw only Craddock silently watching him, and this man he had met as a stranger now seemed a stranger all the more. Taran's lips moved without sound, until at last the words came brokenly, and he heard his voice as though it were another's. "Do you say," Taran whispered, "do you say then you are father to me?" "The promise has been kept," Craddock answered quietly. "My son has come back." This concludes Chapter 13. Thank you for listening. This concludes Chapter 13. Thank you for listening. And remember, have a good day. You deserve it.